Hello again and welcome. We're moving on now to object-oriented programming, but we're going to use the interface that we've been used to by now. So simple Windows Forms, because I'm trying to stay away from the Windows console application because I don't want to be showing techniques and things in there that you're not going to use. So the simple interface here has just a rich text box and a button for running any code. But what we do want to do now is start to create our own classes, and those classes we'll use then to demonstrate all the different aspects of object-oriented programming. So without any further ado, if we press F7 just to get into the code behind, as they call it, and you can see at the minute we have this public partial class called Form1. Up until now we've basically ignored that whenever we were doing event-driven programming. We never looked at what any of this stuff meant. That actually means that Form1 inherits from a form, but you'll see that as we go along. But here is a class and it goes from there to there. So we want to create our own class. We could create it in a different file, but for this first one we'll just create it inside form1.cs. Now you can see this class is contained inside the namespace of the project, which in this case here I've just called it oops begins. So I need to keep my other class or any classes that I create inside the same namespace. So I'll go to the end of that class. I'm going to call my class box, and I'll create it here, which is still inside the namespace but outside of this class. And the way I do it is, again, it's public. I tell it it's a class and it's called box. And that is as basic a class as what you can get there. This class box of mine is going to be for representing like a matchbox, a cigar box, and basically any box that's cuboid or basically cube or cuboid has a length, a breadth and a height. So because it has a length, a breadth and height, I'm going to need properties for length, breadth and height. I'll keep it simple and I'll just make them integers. So I'll create an integer property called length, and another one called breadth, and finally one called height. So int length, int breadth, int height. Let's go back to our form. I'm going to double click on the run code button to create the event handler, and you can see it creates it inside the forms class because that's where the button was. So now that I have something called box, I can create new instances of a box. So similar to the way you would create any type, you do the type name first, and I'll call this match. So if I say box match, that essentially gives me a new instance of a box class. At this point in time it's not ready to be used yet, right? And we can't use it, this match, until we use the new keyword. The new keyword then kicks in and actually creates the memory location and everything for your box. So the way we would do that, I'd say match is equal to new box. And that's a typical way that you would set up a new instance of something of type box. We then have something called match that has three different properties: a length, a breadth and a height property. So let's say I want to just display what the current length is. Well, I've got this here output window Right, it's called RTB output. So if I said RTB output dot text is equal to match dot, and we can see all the options that we have for a match, and none of them include length, breadth and height. What that tells us is that these properties here by default must be private. So you can see I've only got 4 options there. Can't see any of these. So let's go back, and just before in length, let's just make that public. So if I press the dot now, you can see that length is now an option. So it tells me that in C#, private must be the default setting for a property. Alright, I've made it public, so I can now use it outside the class itself. And in fact, I can use it anywhere. And I'm using it outside here just by referring to its name. It's a type integer, so I need to convert it to a string. So if I run that and click run code, I didn't expect to get that. I forgot to tick dot length dot toString. And you can see that the length is 0, which tells me again that an integer must be given the default value of 0. We haven't given it any default values, and the way you would typically give default values or any kind of values to properties in a class is to use what's called a constructor. A constructor is a special, you can call it a function or procedure, subroutine, whatever. And as far as object-oriented programming is concerned, they're then called methods. They work basically the same, but it's called a method. So we have a method called a constructor. It has to be public because it's going to be called from outside. And in C#, the constructor has to have the same name as the class itself. So in this case, it's public box. And then inside here, I would typically give default values for these things. So for example, if I says length is equal to let's say 12, that means now whenever I run it and I create a new instance of this class, length will take on the value 12. And you can see it does there. Okay, let's go back to here, and I'll say, just put a wee bit of text in there as well. I'll say text is, I'll say matchbox, matchbox length. Let me get this right. So matchbox length is quotes, and I'll just add that onto it. So I'm just adding on a string to the end of this string. So just so we're getting a wee bit of information along with it. In this case here, I could probably do away with the .toString. Right, because it knows that we're putting in a string, right, and we're adding something on the string, it's just going to do an append anyway. So just in case sometimes you see an integer being used with toString, and sometimes you see it not being used with toString. I'll create another box, right, and this time we'll call it a cigar box. Now I'll declare this slightly different, where I'm creating the new instance at the same time. So similar to what we have here, we'll just say box cigar equals new box. Alright, and that does the exact same thing as what this does up here. If I was to copy this line, and I'll just change these into plus equals. Okay, so we can see everything. And I think at the end of this line, I will add a car 13 just to give me a new line. And this time I'll say cigar box length is cigar.length. And I'll add that onto the end of it as well. So I'll just put that onto the end of every line. So I'm basically taking a return after it. So matchbox length is 12, cigar box length is 12. Let's say though we want to change cigar. So I could say cigar dot length is equal to so it's slightly bigger, so let's say it was 20. So if we run that, you can see, and this is to show that a matchbox and a cigar, which is also type box, are two separate entities. One has a value 12 for its length, the other one has a value 20 for its length. So they are complete new instances of this thing called a box. Now, one of the things that we don't really want to do is we don't really want to be making these here public, because that means that if you were asked the user to enter a piece of information, let's say someone's age, but you wanted them to enter an age between 18 and 65, well then you have no control over what they put in there. Okay, so let's work on that. So to do that, I'll still keep it public just for now, but I'm going to create another constructor. So I'll copy the current constructor, right, and paste it in there. Now straight away you'll see an error. It says the type box already defines a member called, and then the CTAR just represents, in this case here, box. Alright, so it's basically saying that these two things are the same and they're in the same scope. And just like variables, properties, you can't have two things with the same name, but you can with a method or a function or procedure or whatever if you use overloading, which basically means if you have something inside the brackets there, like if you give it some arguments, it makes it different from the other one. So let's say I wanted, whenever I'm creating a box, to have the ability to supply a length. Well, let's see, inside my box, I'm going to say underscore, sorry, I get an integer, and I'll call it underscore length. And I'm just using that underscore and the lowercase version of length just to let me know that it's something that's been passed on. And instead of setting length equal to 12, I'll set it equal to underscore length. So at the minute, if I run that, you won't see any difference. But whenever I'm creating my cigar box now, I'll run it first then just to show you. Right, so they're both, so that's 12 and that's 20. So what I'll do, I'll take out cigar.length equals 20. So it'll get created here with the default value. So we'll run code, and they're both 12. But if I take the cigar box now and let's say pass in 16, right, that's perfectly valid because our box class has two constructors, alright, and it has one that takes no arguments, which is known as the default constructor, and it has one with one integer argument, and we're passing in an integer. So in this case here, the cigar box will be instantiated with the value 16. So if we run that, we get matchbox is 12, cigar box is 16. And likewise, I could create the matchbox, pass in the value 99, and you'll see that as well. So we have a very simple class with at the minute one public property and two methods that are constructors. The default constructor, remember, has the same name as the class, and then a constructor, right, that takes one argument. We'll stop the video there and we'll pick that up from here now in the next video. Thank you.